Don't forget to check out the new shirts on our website celebrating our 300th episode of All About. Hey everybody, it's Brock and we got a brand new episode of All About. Today we're going to be hitting on the top 5 corals for beginners. This order is based on my experience with the corals, how easy they are to take care of, how quickly they grow, and also which ones I've liked taking care of the most over the years. Also working at a local fish store for many years, I've heard tons of opinions from other reef keepers on which corals work out and which ones usually gave them issues. Starting out, the reef tank should just be the same as any other saltwater tank. You add your sand, add that water, make a nice live rock structure, and let that tank cycle. You'll eventually get some fish once it's complete and the tank is a bit seasoned. Then you'll start wanting to see what coral you should go with first. So jumping right into it, at number 1, everybody should know it, we're going to go with the green star polyps, otherwise heard of as GSP. Green star polyps is such a good beginner coral because it doesn't take a lot of special requirements in your tank for these to grow, plus they grow so dang fast. They are a coral you can feed, but with them being photosynthetic, they can really just live off your lights for their entire life. This is also a coral that looks so pretty. You see a variety of shades of green and a mix of yellow sometimes that really will make them pop, almost looking neon under the right lights. Each polyp that sprouts out has a tiny little white head in the middle, and you'll see those all over the top of the GSP. When closed up, the GSP has a really nice purple skin that you'll see spread over the rocks over time, with little bumps where the sprouts will pop out. And with enough of them beside each other, it'll look just like this huge patch of luscious grass swaying back and forth in the current. Prices should be cheap. Frags can run as low as $10 to get some. Of course, a larger patch of them would cost more, just depends on how big you want to go. But most of the time, also, you're getting an aquaculture version of these star polyps that really aren't grabbing these in the wild anymore. You should see them in the wild though. It's literally mountains of this stuff growing underwater. Since they are also filter feeders, you can feed them all sorts of coral food. They will eat that stuff up. Oyster feast, reef roids, fuel are all great choices to spray in them power heads and let them eat it up. It's cool to watch the star polyps eat because they will immediately shrink up those sprouts to catch the food and will eventually come out again and continue swaying in the current looking for more food. They are not a venomous coral, so you do not have to worry about them stinging you or your other corals. But keep in mind that GSP will outgrow your corals, like it will grow over the top of your zoas, causing them to no longer get any light or have the ability to feed. So be cautious where you place them. Other corals can sting them though, so if you have anemones and mushrooms, they can usually help control their growth around the tank. Placement for the green star polyps can really be anywhere in the tank. I've grown them low, I've grown them at the tippy top. Most importantly is the current. You want to put them in that medium to even strong levels of current. That's going to help them filter feed through the day, and it's also going to keep that bad algae or even cyano from growing on their skin if there's a dead spot around the coral. This can also pose an issue because tangs and your cleanup crew will go after that algae and that cyano, causing them to bother the coral and never open up its polyps. It's going to be a very hardy coral, so even if something like a spike happens, which is going to happen whenever you're first starting out, sometimes you're going to make mistakes overfeeding, or the heater was staying on too long, the lights were on too long, whatever it might be. These guys will usually shrink up, but a lot of times they will survive once you get your parameters back in check. For any of these corals in the list, parameters are typical: salinity 1.020 to 1.025, DKH 8 to 12, pH 8.1 to 8.4, and your temperature 72 to 78 degrees. Calcium, I like to keep mine around 420, and my magnesium at 1400. Another great thing about the GSP is they are super easy to frag. I used to grow mine in a 55 gallon on a rock that had a really nice slope off the edge, which would cause them to grow almost like fingers hanging off the edge of the rock. So after they grew enough, I could just take some scissors and give them a nice little haircut and let that process repeat itself. They can encrust onto the rock, so I'd stay away from trying to peel them off the rock. Sometimes that's going to cause too much damage and the polyps won't come back out, but they will usually bundle up or shelf off a certain spot that'll make it easy to access fragging spot for you to sell them, trade them to a local reefer, or whatever you might want to do with them. At number 2, they come in so many colors. Practically any color on the rainbow that you could possibly want can be found on this coral. It's Zoanthids. Zoas are a great beginner coral because they are typically hardy. They're also photosynthetic, so you aren't required to spot feed them, and they go with pretty much any other coral without causing too much issues. Zoas are aquacultured. We really are not harvesting them from the wild anymore, as reefers have found reproducing them very easily. This has also led us to some crazy morphs and colorations of this coral. There's so many different variations and colors that come out for Zoas every single year. Every time a new one comes out of the tank, that'll have a little bit of a different coloration on one side. Maybe there's a pink in a different spot. They're already named a new thing, and then they'll slap a high price on it and then go forward. So it can get pretty confusing when looking for a specific one. Some of my favorites are the Pandoras, Scrambled Eggs, or the Rastas. Those have some awesome colors on them. Tidal Gardens has some really good shots of them on their website with their names that you can check out, so definitely go look at them on there. That guy's got some great shots of them. Zoas can grow practically anywhere in the tank. I usually prefer to grow my Zoas near the bottom or beside an overhanging. For some reason, they always just did better that way for me. A lot of times if I put them up too high to the lights, they ended up just kind of shriveling up and they weren't coming out as much. You do not want too much current on them, as they will close up, so you'll have to pay attention to that. But it's also good to have some on them because it can be very easy for detritus to get caught around the polyps or algae and cyano to grow, and that will disrupt the coral a lot, causing them to pretty much stay closed up the entire time. While they are feeding off the light, if you want their colors to pop even more and help them grow faster, I would spot feed them too. You can give them a variety of foods like the GSPs. Spraying that liquid food in the power heads is always fun to watch because Zoas will immediately close up once they grab that food. That's also what is so nice with these and star polyps too, is you do not have to really spot feed them like you would do a brain coral. You're not having to deal with the headache of one of your fish or shrimps eating the food before coral can open up and eat it itself. Like you've seen those cleaner shrimps, they will get on top of those corals and just steal every little piece of mysis shrimp. I saw a guy the other day that cut off the top of a bottle and put it in the tank. That way he could cover the coral up and then drop the mysis in there so it could open up and have time to eat the food before all the fish jumped on him. Growth is fairly quickly for Zoas. If you had to put a number on it, most colonies can grow 3 to 6 heads in a month, sometimes even more. And you'll see almost this slime that kind of grows out around them, and then eventually a new little head will pop out. Most of the time, the crazier colors and more expensive Zoas do grow slower. Now, one thing we do need to touch on is the palytoxin. This is a substance that's very dangerous to everyone, including you and your pets. It's secreted when the coral is under stress. Something as simple as adding them to your tank, or when fragging it, it will release this stuff. It's very easy to stay safe from it though. Make sure you wash your hands and are free of any cuts that the substance might get into. Also, wash your hands before and after dealing with them. We've had customers who touched their eyes after fooling with them, and you had to go get medical attention after getting an infection. But seriously, simply washing your hands before and after can save you all the trouble, which you should honestly be doing every time you mess with your tank. When fragging Zoas, it's best to set rubble rock around the original colony, as they will eventually spread to it, and you can simply pull the rubble away for a new frag to plug in. You could also cut the bottom of their stalk if it is stretched out enough for you to get up under, and then you could glue that to a plug. But sometimes it can really stress them out if you aren't careful when you cut too close to the head, so watch out for that. At number 3, we gotta have mushrooms in the list. And I'm not going to pick a particular one because they all pretty much take the same level of care. For mushrooms, you're going to see Discosomas, Rhodactis mushrooms, Ricordias, one of my favorites, and the Pseudocrononactis. You really won't see that last one much because they can be just almost such a pest in the tank, but the first 3, you see them everywhere. Ricordias are always my go-to because they have the wildest little bubble shapes on top of them, and the neon colorations really pop, especially those Yumas. Mushrooms are one of the best beginner corals because they do not require a lot of care for them to flourish. Decent lighting, good tank parameters, and room to grow is enough for a mushroom. They are one of the ones that can survive anything. I swear, they're almost as stingy as Aptasia. Mushrooms can grow really anywhere in the tank, and they will spread out to anywhere they want. Mushrooms can sting surrounding corals, so be careful where you place them and where they end up growing. The only corals I've really seen them put them in their place is anemones, torches, and even an angry galaxia with their sweeping tentacles. Mushrooms are photosynthetic and will filter feed their entire life, so nice reef lights and also spot feeding them will help them explode in size and number. Current, I'd recommend a medium to low current. Mushrooms I put in too much current just seem to stay closed up and wouldn't sprout out as much as a spot that was in a lower current part of the tank. Mushrooms can actually move like you'd see an anemone move around the tank, however it is extremely slow. The way they reproduce is by splitting off tiny little heads below the mushroom, and either the larger one will move out of the way and continue spreading the little ones, or the little ones will move out from under it so they can start receiving light. I love this orange Yuma Recordia rock I have because it originally started out with just one on top. That Recordia just started laying babies all down to the bottom of the rock, and eventually that same one that I put at the top went all the way down to the sand bed, leaving just this beautiful neon colored mushroom rock with a ton of Recordias on it. Fragging mushrooms can be tricky. I'd recommend some of the same logic with zoas. Place rubble rock around them in hopes that they spread over it. They drop off those little mushrooms on it. You can move that rubble rock to somewhere else. Some mushrooms will stretch out with high currents though, which can make it easy to cut at the bottom of their base. And then you can place them in some sand bed and they will recover by grabbing that sand bed and healing up on the bottom. I have seen online some people will split mushrooms by cutting them in half, hoping they'll grow that other mouth and survive. I personally wouldn't recommend that route as it causes too much stress to the coral, and a lot of times the other half just dies off, or worse, both do. Now let's hit on lighting a bit with these corals, and this goes for all 5 in the video. Each of the ones you're seeing here are under Hydra 26s from Aqua Illumination. They're a high output LED that I've been using since the beginning. It's just one of my favorites. Now that is a pricey light, and it's not required to take care of these corals. Par levels you're looking for are as low as 30 and as high as 150. So be looking at that whenever you're looking for lighting. Also, when you look for lights, you need at least a blue and white, but it's nice when you can get some that have the other colors like your reds, greens, and purples. Do your research and get one that is in budget, but at the same time, don't cheap out on your lighting. It's literally what keeps these corals alive. And number 4, this is such a good pick for your first LPS coral to try. It's the candy canes, or trumpet corals. They're a very beginner-friendly large polyp stony that is fairly hardy and does well in a variety tank setups. Candy canes come in a variety of colors too. Most commonly seen are the neon greens and the pinwheels that have a purple rim and that bright green in the middle. They're super pretty. I used to have some in my 55 reef that were almost blue and green interchanging, like literally a peppermint. I miss those so much. Candy canes are photosynthetic coral, but it's a good idea to spot feed them. Pellets are one of the easiest things you can feed them. Turn off your power heads and sprinkle some pellets on each head of the candy cane, and eventually you'll see their mouths begin to open and these tiny little sweeper tentacles will come out to catch it and bring it to the center. It's a really fun thing to watch. Another great thing about candy canes is that sweeper tentacles stay very short around the mouth, unlike others that can get very long and sting other surrounding corals. They can pretty much put them anywhere without the worry that their sweeper tentacles are going to hurt something. Candy canes can be stung on the other hand though, so keep in mind you do not want to place them around anemones or some sweeping torch corals. Underneath the head of the trumpet coral is branches that can be easily cut in order to frag them. The heads of the candy cane will eventually split into 2, leading them to grow each on their own. So do not worry about trying to split one of the heads in half. Let Mother Nature do its thing, and they'll eventually branch off where you can easily go in and cut them with a pair of scissors. Placement for the trumpets should be near the bottom and no higher than the middle of the tank. These corals do not require a ton of light, only about 50 to 70 par if you're looking at the specifics. Putting them too high in the tank will cause them to shrivel up, and for flow, I'd recommend medium to low currents. They will quickly shrink up in higher currents. A nice breeze will let them filter feed well and also keep any bad algae or cyano from growing on the branches. These corals specifically and the ones previously mentioned all originate from the Great Barrier Reef, Indonesia, Philippines, and other surrounding islands. Nowadays, the corals you're getting are all aquacultured, which is great for sustainability. Now, whenever you are dealing with an LPS coral, they have a skeleton that needs to stay strong and continue to grow. So alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium are your main three to test if you begin to notice issues with these corals. Having these chemicals at appropriate levels will keep your corals flourishing. I think earlier I mentioned keep the calcium at 420, magnesium at 1400, and for my alkalinity I like to at least be at 8, but for my reef I usually try to go for 10 to 12. I think in the ocean it runs in those higher numbers. Now, if you're testing one of the three and noticing it will not rise up even after dosing chemicals, it's probably because the other is too high. These three chemicals work like a seesaw. So if your magnesium is super low and it won't come up, I can bet your calcium is going to be too high, like in the 480s. So just another thing to keep in the back of your head, add it to your toolkit so you're not wasting a bunch of money on chemicals when you really should probably just be dosing the opposite one. At number 5, now if you're looking to begin on the SPS side of corals, this is a good one to try first. These small polyp stony corals are called Polypora or the cauliflower coral. These also come at a fair price, usually being under $20 to get a frag. And if you've looked at SPS prices on frags, some of them can be insane for the unique colors. Most of the time with cauliflowers is a neon pink color and a neon green color with all the white polyps that come out around the skeleton. Super pretty. Placement for the SPS coral can be really anywhere in the tank that has a high current and good lighting. They really rely on the lights since they are photosynthetic and would enjoy spot feeding to filter and grow larger. Reef roids are a super good choice. Oyster feast, fuel, all those will work really well. You can spray them in the power heads, let them blow around, they'll eat it that way. Or if you want to get in there with a little syringe and actually spot feed right in front of them, they will soak that stuff up. Keep in mind, anything this coral touches, you can bet it's going to get stung. So put them in a spot where they have plenty of room around them to grow and not bother your other corals. What can even pose a problem is this coral is able to throw out small spores that will attach to the rocks around the tank and grow more Polypora. So you'll see growth on the opposite end where you originally placed them. So be careful. Unlike GSPs where you could put them on a rock that's not attached to any other rocks and they can only grow there, this one can kind of bounce around the tank. With SPS corals, you really want to focus in on your strontium and your KH levels, as they are super important to their growth. You want to be within the usual range of 5 to 15 parts per million for the strontium, as well as keeping that KH 8 to 12. One wild fact for Polypora is if you had to scale out which coral had the highest abundance in the ocean, it's them. So you can see they are not shy at all when it comes to growing. They literally take up the most room in the ocean. I recommend highlighting. 50 to 150 is usually the scale, but I'd push for 100. They'll love it. What can be fun about these guys is depending on where they're placed in the tank and how the current's hitting them will control how they grow. So you can see in our footage, they're all bundled up, but Google some pictures because you'll see some that have these really thick fingers all spread out and others that are tall and skinny. It's really cool how it does that. Fragging is fairly easy depending on how they grow. If you see spots where they grow thinner and taller, try to snip it at the bottom so that you can get a nice sized frag that can recover and be glued to a frag plug. When it comes to fragging, I always like to recommend that the bigger, the better. Don't cut any tiny little pieces off just with a few polyps, because sometimes that'll cause the frag to perish. Cut a nice chunk of it off that has plenty of polyps so that it can continue feeding, and it'll act like nothing ever happened. It'll be able to heal up on its own and do just fine after that. And after that, we will end the episode. I think this is one of the longest all abouts we've done so far. I really hope this helped you learn something new and has given you some confidence to start taking care of corals. Soon you'll be an aquaculturing pro. If you have any additional thoughts about your experience or other beginner corals you would recommend, leave it down below in the comments for a future reefer to see. I know I sound repetitive if you watch my videos, but honestly, the more we learn from each other, the better we'll be at this hobby and at taking care of these beautiful corals. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If it's your first time here, my name's Brock. I worked many years at a saltwater aquarium, and I'm just trying to share my experience with other hobbyists in hopes that they'll be able to add some tools to their toolkit. Alrighty, y'all, I'm out of here. Stay safe, be kind, and I'll see y'all later.